Hello, and welcome to the presentation of Athletes versus Coaches, Perspectives on Social Media. My name is Elyse Gorrell, and I am representing Brock University. Before we start, I would like to mention that I think that the University of Windsor is doing a fantastic job organizing and promoting ECSEPS this year. Really well done. So because we're discussing perspectives on social media, what is social media? And social media is software and websites that promote the participation of sharing personal content and communicating with others on a broader scale. There are some standard social media platforms, and we can identify this through commonality and the longevity of these, and we kind of know the big names. But arguably, social media can be distinguished by what is trending, and that is dictated by the younger generation, which is young millennials and Generation Zers. And this makes sense with the concept of digital natives and digital immigrants, where digital natives have grown up with technology and digital immigrants need to adapt so that they can keep up with the language of digital natives. This is a concept that we're looking at when we're talking about athletes and coaches. Here is a literature review about the effects of social media on athletes. We can see how athlete use of social media can be problematic for organizations as well as the athletes. Antonio Brown is an example of this, where he violated the NFL's social media regulation in 2017 by live streaming video within the banned social media timeline for athletes. And since then, he has used his platform for various rants and arguments and conflicts with organizations. Although not every athlete is Antonio Brown, it is a demonstration of how there might be a lack of training for athletes, or that athletes may not understand what is regarded as appropriate or not. However, in Snyder 2014, it was found that athletes found it inappropriate that organizations would outright ban social media. There is also literature on fan-athlete relationships and how this has an implication on athletes. Although athletes can pick and choose the interactions that they have with their fans, they don't have any control over the posts that people have towards them. So this presents the opportunities for fans to harass, threaten, and demean athletes through social media platforms. But what are the psychological implications for athletes within social media use? David et al. 2018 focused on the psychological impacts, which are the good and the bad impacts, of Twitter use on NCAA athletes. The study demonstrated that psychological consequences that were related to social media showed that critical tweets had more residual effects that negatively affected participants' concentration and increased symptoms of anxiety. But in spite of that, athletes continued to choose to use social media. Why is there this obsession with social media? Before social media, athletes were at the mercy of the media in how they were portrayed. It was this one-way communication. Social media has become a way for athletes to self-present to the world and have this two-way communication. Research is demonstrating how this is a positive thing, that this two-way interaction helps unrepresented groups counter traditional media portrayals. But among the problems that we've already listed in the literature review, social media is also becoming theorized that an individual's social media persona and his or her physical self are becoming intermeshed to the point that the image that a person consciously creates on social media becomes the person's identity. It's a question of, who do I want to be? So the distinction between online and offline self is becoming irrelevant. As a result, this study is using Goffman's theory of presentation of self in everyday life, which demonstrates how people choose to present themselves to their audience by using the analogy of front stage, backstage. Front stage is the role that is created to control the image, and the backstage is the intentions, motives, and goals of the individual. So the discussion becomes more focused about the construction of self in everyday life. And we can look to self-presentation theory, where there is this emphasis on controlling an image of the self in front of an audience because construction of self is highly conscious of the potential audience. And this is connected to impression management, where there is an awareness of how others views one's self-presentation, so that self-presentation becomes goal-oriented and directed towards a purpose. Researchers are finding that there are techniques that are being used to create this illusion, one being how to create this aura of authenticity. But it is hard to argue that something is authentic when impression management alters this. Sometimes what happens is that the athletes receive feedback from the audience, and then the athlete tailors their future posts for them. And so social media can become this performative ecology where there is this illusion of realness to the beholder despite posts being controlled and framed. But how does social media affect coaches? And we haven't really discussed this because there's very little literature about how social media affects coaches or the coach-athlete relation. But we do know from a study by Gould et al. That some coaches do view social media as a challenge when coaching. Does social media fall under the umbrella of a coach's responsibility? And we are looking to Horn's 2008 model that demonstrates this coach-athlete reciprocal relationship and how that coach's behavior influences the athletes and their performance. When we integrate social media into this model, how does the coach's social media beliefs and use affect the athletes? Which brings us to the purpose of this study, which is to understand the different perceptions of social media in athletes and coaches. And this is to bridge the gap in understanding in the coach-athlete relation about the effects that social media has on athletes and their performance. The study is structured as a 3-phase study. The first phase will be the athlete interview. The second phase, we will ask the athletes to provide real examples of athletes' posts, and then with that, add a personal reflection to how the post made them feel. And the phase 3 will be the coach interviews. We're using existential phenomenology, which is the study of phenomenon and how phenomena is perceived in a person's consciousness. We will be taking 12 individual high-performance athletes with 6 high-performance coaches. We are using a phenomenological analysis sequence. So with the interviews, we're reading for the whole, and then we're going to distinguish the meaning units within each interview. Interviews summarize the contents with salient phrases, and the informant's words occur post-interview, and then we're going to examine themes across all interviews using imaginative free variation, guided by the body-space-time relation categories. And then with the posts, we're using Stuart Hall's encoding-decoding framework, which comes up with 3 different readings, which is the preferred reading, which is the intended meaning, the negotiated reading, which is not the intention of the post, but it's something that is still okay. And then we have the oppositional reading, which is the exact opposite of what the poster intended. With these readings, the researcher will compare to the athlete's personal reflections and interpretations. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.